Okay, so I'm glad that you're running a few minutes late because I not only typed in the wrong address and drove in the wrong direction, so I was running late. I got here and I pulled out the folder that I brought, which was not my talk, but instead a paper that my husband's working on that I told him I would read through and give feedback on. So like 10 minutes before it said I was supposed to be speaking, I realized I didn't have my remarks with me. So is that better? I'm going to have to hunch down for the whole.
Yeah, I bet it does.
Is that okay? These are tall girl problems.
You can also, but then, how do you feel about holding? You can pull it out of there and you can hold it, but is that
I'm happy to hold it. You can let me know if I start pounding on it and making it more. All right. So these are tall girl problems. We have them, don't we, Whitney? Okay, is that good? Okay. I felt like it would be both good and productive to spend the first part of the conference today going through the instructions that we've already been given. If we can have a little refresher course and get on the same page about the revelations and the instruction that we have been given, that seems like a good way to focus our minds and focus our discussion, be on the same page. We, for example, wouldn't want to spend an hour deliberating something that we've already clearly been given an answer to because we forgot that we'd been given an answer to it. And so that's my hope. In fact, I'll say it more strongly. I think it would be foolish for us to gather together and debate or discuss or deliberate, and more foolish still to vote on things if we haven't first remembered what we've already been given. So that's the purpose of my remarks for the next little bit, are to try and remind us what we've first been given and help us remember. How many times in our scriptures are we warned about the dangers of forgetting what the Lord has done for us? Or we see the negative outcomes that result from a people who are slow to remember their Lord, their God, or the instructions he's given us. So before we discuss the rest of the day, I thought we should first remember. While we remember, I wanted to share with you some advice that Nephi's brother Jacob gives us. He's speaking to his people, and he says this. This is from Jacob 3. The Lord has done such great and awe-inspiring things. How unsearchable are his deep mysteries. It's impossible for mankind to discover all his ways, and no one knows his ways unless they are revealed to them. Therefore, brothers and sisters, don't disregard God's revelations. By the power of his word, mankind inherited the earth, and the earth was created by the power of his word. So if God was able to speak, and the world came into existence, and was able to speak, and mankind was created, then why can't he command the earth or his handiwork upon it according to his will and purposes? That last part says to me, if God can speak and a world can come into existence, then his word is powerful. And so if he's spoken words to us, we should take those seriously. His words are powerful. And a lot of what we'll read today comes from the Lord, and so we should take it seriously. Jacob continues, therefore, brothers and sisters, don't attempt to give advice to the Lord, but decide to take advice from him. Indeed, you know he counsels wisely, justly, and very mercifully over his creation. I believe that's true, and I hope that can be the spirit with which we approach this conference, is that we don't seek to counsel the Lord, but we seek to take counsel from him. And I mean that in the context of there are things he's already said to us on this topic, and so let's take those things seriously and remember them before we go off on other things. So hopefully that makes sense.
Oh,
Did I do that?
I just realized because this isn't a slide, it's just gonna.
So I just need to keep tapping it.
Yeah.
That's
sorry,
fine,
I'm
'cause
doing
I'll
so many
be
tasks,
scrolling.
full of microphones and tapping.
Okay, okay, so many of you are aware that I put together a document because it was posted on the conference website. So some of you have probably already looked through this and read this. And despite the fact that I've probably looked at it over 100 times, there are still, I might even have read it 3 times in one day, and then my husband asks me a question, and I think, I need to go back and read the exact language. So I hope you don't feel like it's boring or unproductive to actually go through a document and read portions of it, even if you've already read it. I still think it can be helpful to us. So that's my plan, is to go through relevant portions of the document. So let me start by saying this is not a women's council document. There's a lot of other topics on here, and we're not going to go through those because they're not relevant to today's gathering. But you can see at the top of the document what it says, the purpose of it. The purpose of this document is to compile the instructions God's people have received pertaining to priesthood in our day, and to help both men and women understand their respective roles, responsibilities, and obligations in relation to it. So there's a section on baptism in here, and there's a section on sacrament, and we won't go through those. So if I've scared any of you who know that it's like a 5-page document, we're not going to go through all of that. We're just going to go through the relevant portions. And I wanted to also, is my mic, am I moving? Am I doing okay? Okay. I wanted to share with you how this document came to be. I made this several years ago, and it was born out of a pet peeve. And many of you will relate to this as I share the circumstances that caused me to put this together. There was a time period several years ago where we were given a flood of light and truth and information, new understanding, a different way to expound the scriptures than we had considered before. There was a lot to digest, and I'm talking about a 10-talk lecture series where there was a lot to digest, a lot to consider, and it takes a little while to incorporate that into your soul. And then there's a First Holy Order talk. There's an Our Divine Parents talk. There was a covenant that was offered, and something that we've referred to as the answer to prayer for covenant. So there's a lot of stuff that we're digesting, and right after that time period, our scriptures are being reworked with new versification, and this is what I think many of you will relate to. I feel like I was in this limbo phase where I had my LDS references already and memorized, but I didn't have printed scriptures yet because it's quite an undertaking to print new scriptures, so it took several years. And there's new references, and I didn't know where they were, and several instances in a row, or experiences in a row, happened where I was on a women's council, and a question arises: how are we supposed to approach this particular circumstance? If this is happening, what are we supposed to do? And you flounder for a minute, and you're like, I feel like they've said something about that. It might even be about to be canonized in our scriptures. There was a talk that mentioned, and I couldn't remember where everything was, and I felt ungrounded because I didn't have scriptures in front of me to go search. And then the next week I'd be at a fellowship meeting, and a woman would lean over and say, I really want my son to be sustained to the priesthood, but I can't remember the order. Is he ordained first, sustained? I know there's something about 7 women. So several of these examples or experiences are happening, and I felt frustrated. I had this I feel ungrounded and I don't know where to find things. And so I put this document together several years ago as a personal resource for me to organize my head. And partly so that I could just remember where to go to. Oh, that's in TNC 167. So as I have occasionally shared it with friends or with my fellowship, but I have also updated it as new revelations have come. And so if you happen to have a copy that I sent out a couple of years ago, or even a couple months ago, because there's a June 20th of this year revelation in here, if you have one of those older copies, it's outdated and you can get rid of it and use this one if it's something that's helpful to you. So there's that. My intention was to include only things that I understood came from the Lord, and I'll spend a minute defending my sources here so that you have some better context as to what's in there. Okay, well, I'll do that right now. So you'll notice that almost everything in here is in our canonized scriptures. I did include things from the glossary, which I know are not always "thus saith the Lord" statements, but sometimes the glossary more succinctly gets to the heart of the matter. And because we have voted on these scriptures and accepted them by common consent, I felt like it was fair game. And I readily admit I'm cherry picking, verses of scripture or a glossary entry to try and get to the heart of the matter more efficiently, because I didn't want to make a 25-page document. I was trying to pare it down. So anyway, you have canonized scripture in here, which includes our glossary. And there are 2 revelations that have been presented as "thus saith the Lord" revelations, and so I included those because they were relevant. One of them was in August of 2022, and the other one Wendy referenced this morning, and it's the reason you're here today, came this last June. So those are in here, even though they're not canonized, but clearly they're not canonized by virtue of the fact that they came after our scriptures were printed. So I assume no one has a problem with those being in here. They're all canonized scriptures or things that are purported to be revelations from the Lord. But the last source in here that I'm using and will defend for a moment is that there are a few statements from the book Preserving the Restoration that are in here. And I included those. I understood the 10 talks to be an ordinance that were directed and ordained by heaven to be given. They even needed a second witness to bear testimony to them. And so where there are a few details about women's councils included in that book that are not canonized, I included them in the document. So I'm aware that that for some that's been a question as to whether or not, if it wasn't canonized, are we actually supposed to be held to account for what's written in that book? And I'm aware of that conundrum or difficulty. I've thought pretty thoroughly and deeply through both sides of that issue, and I feel like what's in Preserving the Restoration is essential and helpful to how a women's council should run, and so I included it in the document, and you're welcome to take issue with that, but I'm just sharing with you that it is in there. So anyway, that's that. Let's just say 1 or 2 more things before we start. This is, maybe I already said this. I guess I would just share that the purpose of this document is, it's best utilized if you use it to take you to the actual scriptures. There's references here, and you can get to the heart of the matter, but it's a great way to get to know your scriptures and to know what's available in them, to actually go to open the pages of your scriptures and get the fuller context. Like I said, I cherry-picked things about baptism so that you would have a reference point if your son's getting baptized and you can't remember some of the, I hate to say protocol measures, but I guess that's the best thing that's coming to my mind. But go to the scriptures, open them up, read the fuller context, read what Christ said when he gave his disciples instructions on how to baptize. You get the fuller context, you're going to be served much better by doing that. So use the document to point you to the scriptures if you want to use it at all. Of course, nobody needs to, but if it's helpful to you. Okay, so we'll go through the document, and before I do, last thing, I just want to repeat Jacob's words. He says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, don't attempt to give advice to the Lord, but decide to take advice from him. Indeed, you know he counsels wisely, justly, and very mercifully over his creation." So, the first section is titled, "Who May Hold the Priesthood?" The entirety of T&C 167 is this verse. That's just one verse. It says, and you can read along, I asked the Lord that priesthood get extended beyond the confines of men who have continually abused and neglected it. So there's your context. There's a question being asked to the Lord. Can we expand who holds priesthood? I was told that priesthood is confined to men because of the fall and the conditions ordained by God at that time. Until we reverse things in the millennium, that is the way it is going to remain, as to ordinances thus far given in public. So, for example, the reason I feel like this could be a productive and helpful thing to go through is that we don't need to spend an hour discussing whether or not women should hold priesthood. We've been given some pretty clear instruction on that, and so we can focus ourselves better on things that we're not sure how to interpret that. But if things are pretty clear, hopefully this, again, helps us to focus our discussions. I asked the Lord to change that order. It is not going to change. I then asked the Lord that if only men were to hold priesthood for our public ordinances, then could only women vote to sustain them? The saying pleased the Lord, for it was already in his heart. But he said to me, there shall be a minimum of 7 women to sustain the man in any vote. And if the man is married, his wife shall be one of them. Okay? Only men hold the priesthood. Only women vote. And if the man is married, his wife needs to be among those to sustain him. So that's what we have there. Section 175 is our statement of principles that was accepted by common consent. And we read this from there. Priesthood, in its highest form, is an opportunity to serve and bless others. Power can only come from Christ. The reason authority is given is to make men more like God, to lift and to elevate them. And then this is the relevant portion, but it's a repetition of what we already read. Priesthood is confined to men because of the fall and the conditions ordained at that time. Until things are reversed at the millennium, it will remain for men alone to perform the public ordinances thus far given to us. And then section 157, You guys feel free to holler at me if I'm not scrolling because I'm reading off of a piece of paper. Oh, I guess I need to. Wendy, can you come help me? I wasn't sure how to scroll down. Your pad is different than mine.
You're fine.
The next section is Teachings and Commandments 157, which is what we've called the answer to prayer for covenant. And so every time you see section 157, which you'll see several times in the document, that's what it is. It's the answer to prayer for covenant. And something I wanted to point out is that means it's the Lord speaking in first person to us in our day. It's not even ancient scripture we're quoting here. This is very recent, and it's specifically to us in our generation. So, yes. So how do am I just?
So I did it right there, but
Oh, okay.
I think you can, yeah. Sorry, this is a government computer, so.
The government. Okay, so this TNC 57. And again, the husband is to hold priesthood, to baptize and bless the sacrament of bread and wine in the home. And the husband and wife are to bless their children together. For the husband to use authority to administer outward ordinances outside his own family, his wife must sustain him. The ordinations we will skip past because, except for I will mention something at the end there. We are given the advice to keep a record. If you sign a certificate for a man to have a priesthood certificate, there's this advice that's at the in that first paragraph towards the end. All the women who vote to sustain should not only sign the certificate, but also record it in your diaries and journals. Let the records be kept so that there will be an abundance of witnesses and documentation. Okay, I wanted to read this glossary entry, sustain. Sustain is to openly signify support, to openly signify support and approval by vote or affirmation. For example, when 7 women sustain a man to use his priesthood outside his own family for the benefit of the fellowship. For a youth to be ordained, at least 7 women must sustain him to be a priest, which would of necessity include the mother, because she would be the most acquainted with his daily walk. All right. Obtaining a priesthood certificate, sustaining vote of 7 women. Again, from our glossary under public rights. If you have already been ordained, and I'll just point out, if you're going to sign a certificate for someone, maybe it's a good thing to be aware if the man has actually had hands laid on his head and been ordained to hold priesthood. So this is to men. If you have already been ordained, then you have the right to continue to minister to your family as a matter of right. But outside your family, it is different. Even though already ordained, a community needs to recognize and authorize anyone to minister for them. For anyone who would like to qualify to minister outside his family, he must meet in a community and obtain a sustaining vote of a minimum of 7 women. When that is done, all 7 who vote to sustain should sign a certificate. I'm going to skip this next paragraph and go down to if the man is married. If the man is married, his wife must be among the 7 women. If his wife will not sustain him.
Oh, sorry, someone had their hand raised.
Oh.
I didn't know if you wanted to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, to your first question, I'll repeat it in case people couldn't hear it, but remind me what it was.
No, it's okay.
Oh, about the blessing. So there's a statement that says, I always hate when I'm in the audience and I can't hear the question and the person answers the question that I didn't hear. Oh, that was a little while ago. This TNC 15757, and the husband and wife are to bless their children together. She was saying, does that mean blessing, lay on hands? And I'll just say, I think that's up to you and your husband to decide, and I don't know that I'll comment on it. But yeah, I think however it is that you and your husband want to bless your children together, that's something that's available to you. And then your second question was about outside. How do you define ministry? She's saying, does that, like, if your ministry is outside of your family, does that mean ordinances? Does that mean blessing? What'd you say?
Maybe whatever they're asking for, you to do outside?
Maybe it's whatever they're asking you to do, but at least for the purposes of what I'm like comfortable of saying on the spot in the moment, it at least includes baptizing and the sacrament. Those are kind of the only ordinances that we've been given instruction on. There are obviously other ordinances that we're aware of, like giving blessings, but the men in the document are given instructions on how to ordain another man to a priesthood. But other than ordaining a man to a priesthood, baptism, and sacrament, I don't think we're given specific instructions on other ordinances. And that may come because you're a part of a living religion, and things are dynamic and they change and instruction comes. But as far as this is concerned, and as far as I feel comfortable saying saying authoritatively on the spot in person, the only instructions we've been given for ordinances are how to ordain, and there are instructions in here, we're just not reading them because we're not ordaining people, how to baptize and how to do the sacrament. So hopefully that is helpful. Okay, this paragraph in the middle here, are you guys seeing it? I guess I should have zoomed in again. Is that better? Okay. If the man is married, his wife must be among the 7. If his wife will not sustain him, he is unworthy to provide priesthood service for the fellowship. There is nothing implied in the word unworthy regarding a man standing before God. Within the community of fellowship, until his wife is prepared to support him in acting outside the family, his efforts should be within his family. Husbands and wives are one flesh. The struggle to live that kind of oneness is godly, noble, and elevating. The word unworthy is not a statement of condemnation, but only of qualification. It was the word the Lord used, and therefore I do not feel at liberty to change it. I just wanted to comment my own view and something that strikes me when I read this paragraph is a principle that I think we're being taught that the Lord wants us to have our primary and first focus to be our ministry within our own families. That's our priority. And that can apply to me in a number of ways, including maybe I shouldn't go out and try and save all the children in the world if I'm not first taking care of my own children that I've been given stewardship over. So I think this principle of first your priority is your home and your own family, then you can go out and serve the world. And if I'm trying to do that, I don't have to have done it perfectly with my own kids, but if I'm neglecting them, I shouldn't be going out and serving the world and ministering out there. First, take care of your own family, and then your ministry can extend outside of your family. And that's the principle here. I think the Lord's telling us that it doesn't mean a man's unworthy, but if his wife's not ready to have him support him going out and serving and ministering to the world or the community, then his efforts can be within his own family, and he still can perform ordinances and minister to his family. It doesn't mean that he can't do anything. It just means that there's a priority in the home and in the family first. As to single men, there is no impediment to following the pattern and being ordained in the absence of having a wife, but he should marry a woman willing to sustain him if he intends to use priesthood in a community of believers. Okay.
Sorry, I have one question.
Yeah.
Should we refer to when he's divorced to be reference his ex?
I think if a man's divorced, he's single. But again, part of what we'll learn today as you discuss things is that you can go read the exact language and people can have a different view on how it is that they interpret it. And that's why some disputations have arisen, is because we've all been given the same instructions, but sometimes there's leeway within those instructions. And so maybe you'll feel like that's important. If the man that you're in question is divorced, you might think, I think we need to talk to his ex-wife. But I think, again, to be specific or nitpicky, it just says, as to single men. And if you're divorced, maybe you qualify as a single man. You're not married. And so, but if you have children, they're still part of your family. You still have an obligation and a responsibility to your children, even if you're not currently married. So, conferences can be called by anyone. It has to include 7 women if the business includes doing a priesthood ordination. Okay, obtaining, I gotta find my spot here. I have the inspired version of the document in front of me with all my notes, so I'm going back and forth between that and obtaining confirmation from heaven. That's not relevant to us today. Other than that, you may want to be aware that the Lord's instructed men who have first been ordained by the laying on of hands, and then if they want to minister outside their family, be sustained. And then they're given instruction that they should seek confirmation from heaven. Heaven needs to ratify, and they're told, wait until the Spirit ratifies your ordination before you act. Keeping a record, you can read that on your own time if you're interested. This next section says, removing a man's certificate. This is from Preserving the Restoration. Sustaining is by women, and removing authority to act within a community or fellowship is likewise to be done by the vote of women. If a man's worthiness to function is called into question, and I'm just going to pause there and just say that's what's required to call a women's council. A man's worthiness to function was called into question. You don't need a verdict of guilty in order to call a women's council. You don't have to do all of the research and talk to all of the witnesses and make sure that we know the outcome. We were just told in the June 20th revelation, don't come in with a predetermined outcome. The outcome should be based upon what you learn in the council. So all there needs to be in order to call a women's council is that a man's worthiness to function has been called into question. Hey, there's a question that's arisen because we've had a couple people say that they've heard this. We're going to call a council. Doesn't need to be dramatic, doesn't need to be a big deal. We're just going to deal with the question and find out if we feel like you should be keeping your priesthood certificate. Okay, so if a man's worthiness to function is called into question, then a conference can be convened to deal with the question. In removing authority, at least 2 witnesses should speak against the accused, and he should be allowed to speak on his behalf and call upon such witnesses as he chooses. Men can be witnesses, but only women are allowed to vote. Removal should be by unanimous vote of the women present, with at least 12 votes against a man to end his authority to act in the fellowship community. As for his family, he is free to do as he chooses, meaning he can still function in priestly ordinances. He can still bless the sacrament or baptize your child, even if he doesn't have a priesthood certificate, if it's within the walls of his own family. But he cannot act in the community until restored by the vote of a conference of that community. And there's an asterisk in there. If a woman is present and cannot judge the matter, she may abstain. And the vote of the remaining women, if unanimous, and there are 12 votes, will be sufficient. Okay, the next. Again, TNC 157. Yeah.
Some people had some question on that, just real quick.
Sure, yeah. Well, I'll scroll back down so we have the.
The clarity on that is that there has to be 12 women for sure present. You can have 13, 14, 15 if you want, but however many you have, so if you had 15 women, they have to be unanimous, but a woman could abstain. So you could have somebody that said, I'm not voting at all, okay? But if you had been 14, you invited 15, all 14 would have to be unanimous. But you have to have at least 12 present in order to even do it. And those 12, you would have to have 12 unanimous. Is that making sense? Anyway, there's a question on that. So maybe somebody else can explain that better than I'm trying to, but.
Well, I think
it was an evolving revelation. That was something that it became clearer as time went on.
Yeah, and for my own, I'll just say from my own experience, every case is unique and there's different circumstances that arise. And I constantly go back to the exact same paragraph and read it over and over. And it doesn't matter how many times I've read it. When a new question arises, I'm like, go back to the language. And then you have the obligation to interpret the language based off of your current question or current circumstance. Could you guys hear what Karen was saying? Do I need to?
So it has to be unanimous. Whatever, if the man's certificate is taken away, it has to be unanimous. Even one person saying no, they get to keep it. They get to keep it. Okay. So, and in order to hold that council and do that, you have to have a minimum of 12 women. There must always be 12 that are voting yes. Yes, it's renewed. That's got to be unanimous. But you could invite a 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 20th woman on the council if you want. But if you're going to do that, they all have to be unanimous if you're going to take away the certificate. So at least a minimum of 12, always unanimous no matter how many to take it away. One person voting to say, no, I don't think he's guilty, I think he should keep it. He gets to keep it. But a woman could abstain. So if you had 13 women,
Yeah, yeah.
Did I say that right? Okay.
There's one caveat on that, and that is if
Maybe not,
the
yeah.
extra women,
Okay.
anyone beyond the 12, if they're designated as alternates, then they don't have to be part of the vote.
And
Correct.
he clarified that they have to say beforehand that they are alternates, right?
Yeah.
Is anybody else going to add on?
Yeah, I think that's correct. And maybe this is the type of discussion that you will have at your tables in an hour or two when we're done, is that you guys can, if there are questions about this. But yeah, I think the language is pretty clear. Removal should be by unanimous vote. Whether you have 12 women there or 25 women there, it has to be unanimous if you're going to revoke. But yes, there has to be at least 12. And if you have more than 12 women there, they don't have to be slated to vote unless somebody says, you know what, I can't decide, I need to abstain. And so then you pull in other women who are already there and heard everything that the others heard. So, but yeah, I think maybe some of those discussions are exactly what the forum later on is for you to sit and look at the language and answer these kinds of questions. So let's go on to the next DNC one, or TNC 157:57. Again, this is our answer to prayer for covenant. So the Lord, speaking in first person, says, I have told you that to remove authority to use priesthood outside a man's family requires a unanimous decision by 12 women. A council of 12 women must be convened either in the man's home fellowship among those who are acquainted with his daily walk, or in private at a general conference, also including among the 12 women from the conference those who are acquainted with his daily walk. Am I in the right spot for you guys? Yes. Okay. Okay, I need to get a drink of water really quick and then I'll continue. So you ponder those thoughts for a minute. I've got a water bottle. Yeah, thanks. Reinstating a man's certificate, reinstatement of the man's authority must be considered by the same council of 12 women when the man petitions for the decision to be rescinded, and requires 7 of the 12 to agree upon his reinstatement, because you need 7 women to sign a certificate for you, which can occur at any time. There's no required year-long suspension period. Okay, it can happen at any time. During the period of suspension, again, we've mentioned this earlier, nothing affects the man's duties and responsibilities in his own family. I'm going to skip down because the thought continues in this revelation that was given in August of 22. The Lord quotes what I just read to you, and so I should leave it up, maybe. He quotes that thing we just said, reinstatement of a man's authority must be considered by the same council, and then continues, I say to you, if a man has been suspended for adultery and then been reinstated and return again to adultery, he shall not be reinstated again, for to do so places my community at peril. We're talking about a really specific set of circumstances right here. A man has had his certificate taken away because of adultery. He's been reinstated, and then he returns to his adultery again. So very specific set of circumstances, and the Lord says, you shall not reinstate him again. These words were to guard so that no injustice results. I ask, is there injustice if my people cannot become one because of disobedience? Even a single disobedient soul who breaks the hearts of others by his sinful disobedience can destroy the peace of all my people. I say again, each of you must walk truly in my path, not only to profess, but to do as you profess. And then there's some pretty strong language here. You shall not show mercy to the disobedient when to do so results in injustice to the people who seek to become one. You shall not forgive the adulterer and welcome him into the community when he has been forgiven and returns again to his sin. You shall not place the community at peril by embracing the willful and unrepentant among you, to leave your little ones at peril of injury, harm, and destruction. That's some pretty strong language, and we are also told, forgive, have mercy, have compassion. But there's a specific set of circumstances here where the God of heaven is talking to this people saying, you shall not forgive when ... So I want to point that out. Part of the responsibility that is inherent in women's council, I think, is that there's a responsibility to seek to protect a community. And so I want to point out that so much of what we've been given is to protect the rights of the man who's called into question. And he deserves his rights to be protected and to have a fair women's council. That is real and true and good, and we need to do that. We need to protect his right to a fair council. And what we're being told here is that you also need to keep in mind, protect the rights of a community who's trying to be peaceful. It's trying to be harmless to each other. So you need to, I hope that we approach a women's council with both in mind. Let's protect the rights of the man, and we also need to protect the rights of the community. And one shouldn't trample over the other. And that's what makes it so darn hard. The struggle is real. It is difficult. These matters can be very emotional, can be very taxing. But I think it's important that we remember, he has rights. He deserves respect. So do a group of people who are trying to be harmless to each other and have peace. And if we are willingly and knowingly allowing people who would come in to leave your little ones at peril of injury, harm, and destruction, then do you deserve a community of peace? Maybe we need to stand up and say, no, that behavior is not welcome among us. And instead of, compassion, love, forgive. Not always. You were just told a specific set of circumstances where you shall not forgive. So anyway, I think that's worth ranting about for a moment. Forgive me. Let's go down. We are almost to the end of this. Okay. From June of this year, just 4 months ago, you're all familiar with this. Wendy, did you already read this morning? I stepped out. Okay. On June 20th, 24, the word of the Lord came to me saying, there have been disputes among the women about the conduct of women's councils and disputes about how they are to proceed. I have given direction. We've read a lot of that direction this morning. I have given direction, and it is not wise for the women to be commanded in every particular. But it is also not wise for the direction that I have given to be used to achieve a predetermined outcome. The outcome should be based on and a result of what is learned in the council. All my revelations are intended to guide you. And therefore, remember what I have told you, that I suffered the Constitution of the United States to be established to maintain the rights and protection of all, both the man and the community who's trying to become a community of peace, based upon just and holy principles, and that I established the Constitution by the hands of wise men, whom I raised up for this very purpose. The abuses and mistreatments of mankind by unjust governments needed to end, and the principles adopted by the Bill of Rights were intended to secure the protection of the accused protection of those accused of transgressing the laws of the land. The women should consider these protections as they decide how to conduct councils involving those accused of transgressing the laws of God. Let the women call a conference at a suitable time and place. Welcome to the conference. To allow interested women to attend. Have your wife, Stephanie Snuffer, welcome Stephanie. Conduct the conference deliberations and let any who want to speak present their concerns, reason together and draw upon the experiences from these past women's councils. Let the women learn to come to agreement. And the voice of that conference decides all matters raised. And I remind you that the majority of those who vote decide the vote of the Conference of Women. If 100 vote, then 51 decides the matter. And if another dispute arises later from other women's councils, and there is a need, call another conference of the women and resolve the dispute by the voice of the women's conference as often as need arises. Hear me now, let every person take care in how they use my name, as if I had part in their every dispute. For many things provoking arguments among the people are born from pride, stubbornness, aspiring for control, and reckless indifference towards me and one another. I bear with the people still and patiently await the return of natural fruit in my vineyard. Do not be misled by my patience, for the time is quickly approaching for the harvest of my vineyard. Okay, that is all that I think is relevant from this document to the conference today. I hope that was helpful, and apologize if I bored you. My hope is that today's conference can be a turning point in a positive direction for us as a people, where we can unitedly rally around determination to first understand what has been given, and then a determined effort to follow and adhere to that. My experience has been that a lot of the difficulty and drama that some of you have felt over the last few years results from people, men and women, who have, what I'll say, stepped outside of their lane. And maybe that's because they didn't understand what their lane was. Okay, so I'm not making accusations here, but I think people have stepped outside of their lane, and if we can have this reminder of what is our lane? What have we been asked to do? What are you being asked to do? And you don't need to go outside of that. I think remembering that and then doing that would cut down on a lot of the difficulty that people have experienced. So anyway, today I really hope that whatever has gone before, maybe there's some apologies that need to be spoken, maybe there's some forgiveness that needs to be given, maybe there's some personal reflection on how I could have acted better. Whatever's happened before, I really hope that today can be a turning point in a positive direction, that we're unitedly rallying around this idea of, okay, I need to understand what my responsibility is, I need to understand what's been given, and I'm going to do it truthfully and faithfully. That is my hope. And so before I end, there are a few personal thoughts that I wanted to share just from my experience, because Wendy and Lacey gave me the microphone. But I'm going to take a drink first. Talking to you guys makes me thirsty. Okay, just from my own experience, these are not thus saith the Lord, this is just thus saith Sarah, which means you can take it with a grain of salt or not take it at all. When we're participating in a women's council, be wise, be discreet, be kind, be courageous, and mostly be prayerful. Each case is unique and presents challenges that don't have standard answers, or at least there's potential for challenges that don't have standard answers, that might not be spelled out for you directly. And so you need to be prayerful. I really do believe, and I've participated in more than one women's council, and I have watched more than one women's council from the sideline. And I really do believe that we've been given a set of specific instructions already, and within those instructions, there is leeway. There's more than one way to run a women's council and still meet all of the requirements and the instructions that we've been given. So be prayerful. And I'll just say it, if there are 12 women who can unanimously vote on one thing, there might be a good reason for that. And so if you're standing on the outside, let's keep that in mind, maybe. The other thing I thought maybe worth saying, and it doesn't need to be said to everyone, and it doesn't need to be said in every situation, so I don't mean for this to sound condescending or patronizing, but the thought I had to share was we should calm down a little bit. Just as a helpful reminder, if you're a person who needs to hear that in any given situation, I've heard people associate a women's council with an LDS disciplinary council, which it is not. Okay? Remember, staying in your lane, a women's council does not affect a man standing before God. It's not a comment on his worthiness before the heavens. You are not taking away someone's access to salvation. You are not damning a man to hell. You are taking away a priesthood certificate. And but I don't mean that in a patronizing way, because we all have come from different cultures where it felt really important. I mean, some of us have been through an excommunication court, and so there's some emotion tied to that, and I want to recognize that. But also remember, that's not what this is. And so if you make the wrong judgment call and take away a certificate, you didn't damn the person. Anyway, I don't mean to make light of this, but hopefully you get that point. Like, let's calm down a little bit was my thought, because what you're doing doesn't affect someone's salvation or their standing before God. Luckily, we have nothing to do with that. That's something that God decides and determines. And at the same time, I've also heard people relate a women's council to a U.S. court of law, just citing things that are in court of law, like, oh, we can't do a double jeopardy, we can't stack the jury. I think all of that is really great because there's a lot of good common sense and wisdom in how a legal court system works. But also, remember, you're not bound by the same procedures of a U.S. legal court because you're not a U.S. court of law. You don't have authority to put someone in jail. You don't have authority to fine somebody a fee. That's how you could raise money for a temple. Anyway, so I want to say calm down, and I also want to say, but you need to rise up, because there is a responsibility that has been placed on you to protect a community, or to be one facet of, or one way that a community can be protected. And so I've also heard women say, I can't be on a women's council. I will never do that thing because I don't want to judge and I don't want to become the accuser. Yes, the Lord has taught, with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And so we need to be careful that we judge righteous judgments and that we don't condemn or accuse our brothers. We certainly don't want to get into that territory. But also, we are being asked by heaven to judge a matter. And there's some pretty strong language. You shall not forgive if, ... Do you need me to pause? So anyway, I hope that makes sense. Calm down, but also rise up and be willing to be courageous and try and protect a community of peace so that there's no injustice done to your little ones. Okay. Just a few more things. I wanted to share my thought that women can be wise. We have such great capacity to be nurturing, to be loving, to be kind, to be forgiving, and to be wise. We have such great capacity for that. Women can also be foolish, and we can be vengeful and spiteful and petty and mean. There's capacity for both within us, and we're accountable for which we choose to employ here in this world. It struck me in my most recent reading of the Covenant of Christ, my most recent, as if I've read it lots of times. When I read the Covenant of Christ recently, it struck me in the book of Ether that the secret combinations that led to an entire civilization's destruction and downfall, it began because a woman planted the idea. There was a king named Jared whose daughter was beautiful and subtle, it says, and she came to her father and says, "Why is my father so upset? Don't you remember that there are secret plans of ancient origin that have come down that tell you how to get kingdoms and how to rule. To be clear, it's both men and women who participated in what we call secret combinations that led to the downfall of this entire civilization. But it just struck me that the idea was planted in that case by a woman. And I share that to say we have influence. We are beings of power, and our influence can have great effect. And we are accountable for how we use that influence. So use it good. I'm sensitive to the time. I don't even know what the time is, but I'm sensitive to it. So I will just end with one more scripture and leave that ringing in your ears as I finish. The last counsel or advice that I want us to remember as we participate in women's councils going forward comes directly from our Lord, who told us in the answer to prayer for covenant, again, specifically, first person from the Lord to our generation. He says, "Be of one heart and regard one another with charity. Measure your words before giving voice to them, and consider the hearts of others. Although a man or a woman may err in understanding concerning many things, yet he can view his brother with charity and come unto me. Study to learn how to respect your brothers and sisters, and come together by precept, reason, and persuasion, rather than sharply disputing and wrongly condemning each other, causing anger. Take care how you invoke my name." This isn't the first time that the Lord said this to us. It was in the June 20th Revelation as well. "Take care how you invoke my name. Mankind has been controlled by the adversary through anger and jealousy, which has led to bloodshed and the misery of many souls. Even strong disagreements should not provoke anger, nor to invoke my name in vain, as if I had part in your every dispute. Pray together in humility, and together meekly present your dispute to me. And if you are contrite before me, I will tell you my part." The last thing I wanted to quote is the Lord telling us, "How you proceed must be as noble as the cause you seek." So, there you go. Yeah.
I have short girl problems. I'm moving the computer. This will not be a problem for me. Thanks, Sarah.